Good day, my friends. It's Billy Mandarino, and you have come across the Now-ist Experience podcast. Today is an amazing day for me because I get to have one of my favorite people on the planet back on the Now-ist Experience podcast. If I had that applause button or that crowd button in a stadium, I'd hit it right now because we've got the world famous Michael Bowker on the show today. So if you're watching us on YouTube or if you're tuning in on your favorite podcast format, please share, like, subscribe this podcast. It's one you're definitely going to want to share with other people and affect other people's life because we are going to touch on some deep topics today that are going to ripple out across this planet, hopefully across the universe. And we're going to help some people realize that they have an impact greater than they know. And Mike is a brilliant storyteller, author, speaker, collaborator. He's a genius. I can't talk enough about him because he's also a very dear friend of mine and my favorite golfing buddy, partner, and best ball partner. And he's an incredible human being. So please, without further ado, Michael Bowker.
Well, thank you, Billy. I appreciate that, especially the best ball partner business. We are pretty tough together. Yeah, but I really appreciate being on today. This is a topic that I'm interested in, and I think a lot of people will be and are right now, whether they call it this or not. People, I think it's just something you need to focus on day after day, and if you do, there are great benefits.
That's exactly what I'm about is how can we be an example in the world? How can we pay it forward, if you will? But what's so great about you, Mike, is how you've written so many books. And we just tell the audience briefly, how many books have you written? How you're a journalist, you're an author, you are an incredible creative. Just tell a little bit about yourself so the audience that have never met you before or have seen our previous podcasts or listened to our previous podcast about Michael Bowker.
Ah, well, I've been a journalist, as you know, for a long time, and I've probably written over 4,000 magazine newspaper articles for LA Times, Reader's Digest, and just a variety of publications across the country. And I've written over 20 books for Simon Schuster, Random House, um, and now I have my own publishing company called 60 Degrees Publishing, which is lots of fun, a whole new challenge. Um, so I've been doing this for a long time, and if I had to do it over again, Billy, as we've talked about, I would do the same thing. It's been
Yes.
a lot of fun.
That's the key. That's when you know you're doing what you love, and then what you're doing is changing the world and affecting people's lives because it's bigger than you, right? It's a bigger mission, and that's what I'm excited about today's podcast. Mike and I are going to collaborate today on this creative endeavor to bring a ripple effect, if you will, throughout the world with these stories. Mike has got a new book coming out. It's called No Ordinary Days. He's also written a book called Gods of Our Times. We're going to talk about that as well. But I'm really excited about your book coming out because Mike and I play golf together. He fills me in on the stages. It takes so much to put a book out. I mean, I put one book out. I wrote The Now-ist, put it out in 2018, and it was just an incredible, monumental task. Most people just dream about putting one book out, as I did. You put 20 books out. The process is huge, and you do it all the time. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of heart and effort and inspiration. So I'm so excited about this book. Could you tell us a little bit about No Ordinary Days, which is coming out, I think, in the spring?
Yeah, it'll come out in the spring. I think within very shortly, you'll be able to pre-order the book. So it'll be up on Amazon. It'll be in as soon when it comes out. Of course, it'll be in Barnes and Noble, and you can get it off my website, 60degreespublishing.com. And of course, I'll sign it in that case. But Billy, as we've talked about, what has come about in this book, what the book is about, No Ordinary Days, is a collection of my favorite 30 stories that I've done as a journalist. And these are not short stories. These are fairly long features that are in depth. And when I finished and we all looked at it, I just thought, boy, these have a ripple effect. And I did a piece for each one called What Happened After. And I reached out to all these people that I had done stories about, some of them 20 years ago. And I said, what's life been like? Did this story that we did, and many of them are from Reader's Digest. They were originals for the Digest, which means they were about 6,000 words long, which is far longer than most newspaper magazine articles that you'll see. They're like short stories. And I would ask, how did that? And also, the last part of this is it went to about 80 countries around the world. We had well over 100 million readers.
Wow.
So I would ask them, okay, did this story have an effect on your life? And what's your life been like since the last time we talked, which in some cases was 20 years ago? Well, the stories that I got in the what happened after blew me away. In some ways, they're more remarkable than the original stories. And it was amazing what has happened. And that's where I started thinking about this ripple effect. It kind of started with the original thing that they did that drew me to the story in the first place. But since then, it has rippled out. In one case, as I call the story, the man who saved 1,000,000 lives, and it started with one, and that's what you and I have want to talk about today. Is that you don't typically just do one kind thing. There's no such thing as one small thing, one small positive thing. It ripples, it gets bigger. And most of the time, you don't even know it. It touches people. As I was talking to you earlier, there was a Harvard study done on this. It was literally on the ripple effect. And I do want to tell about how specifically how the ripple effect happened in some of these stories I did for No Ordinary Days. But just to get to this Harvard study for a second, they interviewed 12,000 people. And in the statistics that they drew from this, every time you did one small act of kindness, it directly affected 10 people. But then they realized that those 10 people then affected 10 more. And so one small thing that you did, according to this study from Harvard, affects at least 100 people immediately within 24 hours, 24 to
Wow.
48 hours. So it's something that we don't teach enough in schools. We don't focus enough in our own lives. We don't think about. But every small thing that you do in a positive way um, can be monumental. It ripples and it goes, and sometimes it doesn't stop. Sometimes it continues on for decades.
Oh my God. Well, I am so excited to know because some people enjoy the subjective side of writing and creativity and stories and news articles, but the objective, the scientific evidence, I think persuades so many more people because they realize that, hey, I can do one act of kindness. Yes, I'd love to help 100 people. The exponential growth is so powerful. And that's been my heart for so many years, paying it forward to people and knowing, I guess not even knowing the scientific side of it, but just knowing how good it feels to give. And how another study I remember, I think it might have been Harvard, they studied the serotonin levels in people. So when an act of kindness was given to a random person, they measured the serotonin levels in the individual and the recipient. But the most important part of the study was somebody observing that random act of kindness, their serotonin levels went up the same amount. So coupled with that study that you had recited from Harvard and this, there is changing the world. And you're right, it's not taught in schools. It should be taught like emotional intelligence with science and math in school. This would be a perfect subject that you could go probably infinitely out and find out how these random acts of kindness help other people, and then have legions of people being kind and changing the world. We wouldn't have all the hunger, the wars, the strife we have on the planet if more people did this as a top of mind action, not so much as, oh, this nice thing I do on Sunday or when I randomly see somebody, but make it a way of life, a practice. I love that so much.
Well, I'll tell you one of the stories that I did, and this is one of the smaller ripple effects. I did a story on a fellow named Ken Benedict, and I did this in the late '90s for Reader's Digest, and he had about 50 joints, pot cigarettes, right? And in those days, you got nailed for that, you went to prison, and he did. He went for 5 years for this, and he's 20 years old or so. And he had a real challenge when he was in prison as to whether his life was worthwhile, what he was doing. He really had tremendous self-doubt, but he was not considered a risk. So they put him as a member of the fire suppression team, which California has. They have it, they call it the inmate firefighters crew. And he went out to fight some fires in Southern California. He ended up in Malibu, where they had a gigantic wildland fire, and it caught some houses on fire. And one of the houses was just totally engulfed in flames. And the captains told everybody, you can't go in there. They could hear a woman screaming in there. It was too dangerous. But our guy, Ken, took off anyway, ran into the house, grabbed the woman, and came out in very Hollywood-like fashion and saved her life. The story doesn't end there. She kept screaming, even though she was safe. And he finally got it out of her that her son, who was autistic, was still in the house.
Oh,
And he was
wow.
up on the second floor. So now the house is literally falling apart. And Ken ran in anyway, ran up the stairs, grabs this kid, and out he comes. You know, they're smoking on fire, but everybody is safe and virtually unharmed. And I heard about this story, interviewed him. They sent him back to prison.
Oh,
So this is where, we're going, goodness, and did this story, and it came out in Reader's Digest. So I didn't talk to him again for 20 years. And I called him, I tracked him down via social media just a few months ago and found him. And he just broke down on the phone. And he said, I've always wanted to call you and tell you what happened because of your story. He said, everybody read it, including the governor of California. He pardoned me within a week.
oh my God.
He says, I did not have to serve the last 4.5 years. And when I got out, though, I had trouble finding a job because I had this record. And he said, a head of an international company read the story and offered me a job. And he says, today, I run their international computer system. And he says, I've got a wonderful house and a beautiful life, tons of friends. And he says, but the most important thing for me is that every 2 weeks, I'm asked to go to some school in Northern California somewhere and talk to kids about no matter what happens in their life, they're always going to have this second chance to make things right and to make things better. And so the ripple effect then went from this story into him out into how many of these children is he reaching? I don't, it's hard to know, but the idea that he did this one positive thing, which of course is very dramatic, but it is just a great example of the ripple effect and what can happen. And he says he's been one of the happiest guys on the planet for the last 20 years.
Oh my goodness. And that is just one of 30 stories in No Ordinary Days, your book that's coming out this spring. How incredible to go. That to me, that was the whole book. It could have been a whole book. You could have a movie on this guy's life and how beautiful it is to be, right, in the gutter and, doing drugs, than to be a role model and helping kids. I think so many kids in this day and age with the overwhelming, what I call infobesity, they're obese with information, social media, having to compete with the Joneses, the comparison mentality, and knowing that you get second chances, that, if you fail at something, you got a chance to make a difference. But it all starts with the random act of kindness. It doesn't start with you. It starts with you giving some kind act of yourself, not asking for anything in return. I love that message in the story. But look how it paid him back. Look how the universe paid him back.
Yeah, exactly. And Billy, if we got just a second, I'll tell you another story that's in the digest, which is even this one goes worldwide. And I heard about this on a small radio show in Northern California one day when I was driving around because I was working for Reader's Digest. I knew right away this is a story that I wanted to do. And there was a fellow named Graham Pierce who had grown up in Dublin, Ireland during the IRA conflicts.
Mm.
And one of his friends had been in an exploded building, and they had to tear apart all the things, the concrete and the wood that was on top of his friend was crushing him. And his friend was okay, seemed to be unharmed, and he stood up after they got all the stuff off him. And then, boom, he just passed out and died right there of a heart attack.
Ooh.
And so Graham went to the doctors and said, "What happened?" They said, "Well, when you are crushed like that, all the cells are broken and potassium comes blasting out and goes right to the heart." Well, this has everything to do with the story that then occurred. Graham decided he didn't want to have any more to do with violence. He came to California, got a job as a rescue director for Yosemite National Park. A young 12-year-old girl from San Francisco was up in the park hiking, and a boulder rolled down on top of her and crushed her she was in a small little divot there, so she wasn't totally crushed, but she was under there. And it took them 6 hours to get that boulder up. And Graham stayed under there with her. So that if the boulder suddenly collapsed, he would have died as well.
Wow.
But in the end, they pulled her out. He had filled her body full of plasma. That way, when the potassium came firing out, it had nowhere to go. It could not get to her heart. And so she survived.
Wow.
So that was the story that I did. 1 Inch from Death, it was called. It was a great story, went worldwide. Billy, the story is just beginning there. Now, I didn't talk to Graham. Well, I did because we had a couple other projects, but I didn't talk to him for a good 20 years after. Then again, I reached him this summer and he said, well, he says, I do have a story to tell you about what's happened after. He said, after the story came out, went worldwide, I got some phone calls from doctors in Vladivostok, Russia, which is clear out by the Sea of Japan. It's completely isolated from all other parts of the world. And when the Soviet Union fell, Vladivostok got no more help from anyone. And they have about 1.5 million people there. And they asked Graham, can you get us some heart monitors? Because we have nothing to help people who have heart problems here. And we're losing thousands of people every year. And we think we could save them if we had these. And we read your story in Reader's Digest. We think you're a medical hero. Can you help us? And he said, no, I'm a rescue guy. I don't know. I don't know anything about this. So he's trying to figure it out in his mind. And about a month or two later, he came by a hospital, and there was a giant truck dumping machines out into a repository. And he knew what they were. And he drove over. He says, those are heart monitors, aren't they? And they said, yes, we got brand new ones. We don't need these anymore, but they work. They gave them to Graham. He raised money to ship them to Vladivostok. And now they've had them for 20 years, and they're literally saving thousands of people every year because of this. Now, the doctors in Vladivostok would go to world medical conferences, and all of a sudden, Graham started getting calls from Central America, all over Africa, Asia. Can you help us? So he expanded his whole process to include all kinds of other secondary products from hospitals around the United States, and literally now is supplying them worldwide to people who otherwise wouldn't have much, of a chance medically. So he's a guy that I call the man who saved 1 million lives. And it started from that one life he saved in Yosemite. That is one of the biggest ripple effects that I've ever been a part of. And I'm very happy that my story might have played a little part in that.
Oh my God. What I love so much, Mike, is that you, when you think about it, you, by bringing these 30 stories that are in your book, No Ordinary Days, by bringing them into the world, you've created a ripple effect personally. And I love that about the greater story, because you think, okay, you bring these stories out into the world, but you personally, by being an amazing journalist and writer that you are, bringing them into the world where people could read them and connect to them, and now come out in this new book that we can have this ripple effect. You can have this ripple effect continue out. And now think the people that might be inspired by some of these stories to make a change in the world, or be inspired to do some random act of kindness. I mean, I just love it. That's what the world needs. It's 2023. Your timing could not be better.
Well, and part of the book, Billy, and thank you for saying all that. And part of the book is encouragement. I'm not browbeating anybody. I'm not preaching, but I am encouraging strongly that as journalists, we get back to telling these kinds of stories, to sharing that part of the human story, which is positive. We're really focusing on the negative right now, wars and this and that, and racial conflicts, and whatever conflict we can possibly dig up. That's what journalism is focused on. And that's maybe half of the human story. We're not telling the other half. And so part of the reason I did No Ordinary Days is to try to show this is what can happen if journalists will start focusing and giving some value to these kinds of stories again.
Mike, does it always come down to, I mean, I hate to say it, I don't want to be negative, but you've heard it bleeds, it leads. I mean, businesses, column, magazines, news stories, the media, they always try to get that sensational story, that shocking story, because it'll sell ads. People will watch the show. Any ideas for inverting it? I mean, thank God you're bringing a book out like this. It's positive. It's going to inspire people. It's going to want them. I know it's going to inspire them to do random acts of kindness. The smallest act of kindness, as you said earlier, can affect 100 people. I mean, exponential growth on that level could change the world. How do we do that? How do you help the media along when they're so focused on their bottom line and selling the next story? And
it's not going to be easy. We seem to be in a fairly deep rut about that, and the social media has made it worse. There's clickbait, where you put on some kind of negative, horrible thing, and everybody, oh, I want to see that, and click it. I think schools need to start focusing on the ripple of the positive ripple. Obviously, there's a negative ripple effect too, that's every bit as great. Although, in my opinion, positive ripple effects, positive things, the ripple effect can last longer. Negative ripple effect can be explosive. But I don't know that it lasts as long. But that's I have no scientific studies to back that up. That's just my thinking of this. But Billy, I wanted to get real specific for a second, if I can. If you wanted to think about 4 ways to create a positive ripple effect, and this is just when you're dealing with somebody one-on-one, whether it's at work or whether it's at the grocery store, or wherever it is. But if you can just acknowledge them, it doesn't matter what sweatshirt they have on or what color hat, or just acknowledge each other as human beings, and then show some appreciation for what they do, who they are, and 3, if someone wants advice or someone is asking for it, be there for them and give them the best advice that you possibly can. And 4, maybe most importantly, give them a compliment, admire them, make sure it's an honest compliment. Dishonest compliment, a fake compliment doesn't work. But if you look at these four, to acknowledge, appreciate, advise, and admire, the key is we start those four things with ourselves. We start with ourselves. I think we need to acknowledge that we are somebody, and we need to appreciate what we do, especially. That's why this positive ripple effect can be so powerful, because it can make you feel better about yourself. And the ripple effect is now going inward. And that's, I think, critical, because it's hard to make it go outward if it hasn't gone inward first. And then advising, you know, always be talking to yourself about how you can do things better, how you can be better, etc. You don't have to stress yourself out about this. This is more of a positive. It's more like surfing. Let's just get on that wave and rock and roll. And if you do, everybody does things that they can admire about themselves. And if that is kept within within the realm of humility, it's powerful. So
I
this
love that, Mike, because you've basically just given us a framework, the 4 A's of the ripple effect. I mean, you've got a framework that's repeatable. And I love that you mentioned that, yes, it all starts with you. It always starts with you, because these grumpy people cannot pay it forward, cannot create random act of kindness if they don't feel like they are valued or worthy. But it's a brilliant framework. I love it. It's very usable. It's user friendly. It's something that everybody can do.
and part of the power of the ripple effect is the idea that even a small gesture that we make can have a terrific echoing, can have a terrific ripple effect out, which gives us a modicum of power. It says we matter, we're here, and what we do can affect lots of people. Because I think in this world today, there's this real feeling that we don't matter, that we don't have an effect, that a few people have all the power and our voices are never heard. Well, guess what? They are. They are heard, and they're heard in this way that we're talking about. And if we start feeling like I hate the word empowered. It's ancient by now. But
Hmm.
if we feel like we matter, and that what we do uh, can carry on, um, I don't know. I think that you can certainly feel better about yourself, and it makes it that much easier then to create another positive ripple effect.
Well, the beautiful thing about the ripple effect is it comes back to you. It's like a boomerang or an echo. You send it out, it's not like it's just gone. It's called the law of attraction. I mean, ultimately, like is attracted by like. Whatever you put out, it comes back to you like a boomerang. So if people are living by these 4 A's that you've so brilliantly put out, and the kind of the framework for creating a ripple effect, applying it to yourself and to others, it's going to come back to you. So why would you not want to give this experience to somebody else? Give it to yourself first. I love that. But I read a quote by Dr. Joe Dispenza that I love. He says that, the power in giving is giving your love, right? I mean, you got to give your love. You can't, expect to receiving something if you can't give it away first. So this is basically giving your love out to people, but give it to yourself first, and then you're going to be inspired to pay it forward to other people and to ripple out that kindness out to the world.
Well, and the other end of this terrific, I don't want to call it a weapon, because that implies something else, but this wonderful tool or device that we have is absorption. And that is, if someone comes, and which happens every day, right? I mean, just about every single day, you're going to meet a certain number of people. Somebody's going to be negative. Somebody's going to say something negative, be negative. And most sarcasm fits into this. People could afford, I think, to ditch 9/10 of the sarcasm that they use, because it's typically passive aggressive. But anyway, when you hear something negative, if you absorb it and don't pass it on, this Harvard study, by the way, said that 93% of people who come across something negative, it affects them.
Mm.
and it affects them in a negative way. So it really has. But if you can learn to absorb it, put it aside, um, I did I did a book in Idaho, and I spent a lot of time right next to the Kootenai River, which is a gigantic river. Actually, it's in Montana, and it's beautiful. And I snuck into this. I was doing a story on this toxic chemical that these monster international company was putting into its products, and I snuck into the mine where they were creating this toxic stuff. And I knew when I got out, I had to get rid of the clothes I had on because they were toxified. So I tied them in and tossed them into the Kootenai River and watched them go around the corner. And the sun was just coming up at that time. And I thought, man, if we could do that with negative, I mean, it's a long story, but if we could do that with the negative things that we come across each day, find some way to put them out, put them away, get them out of there. Don't pass them on to anyone. Make it stop with us. And then what we do pass on are the positive things. Now that's a monster challenge. Not everybody can do that every day. But if we try that, if we use that as our goal, it's a good thing.
No, I love that because it's, of course, we put our clothes on every day. I mean, why not? And I love imagination. I think it's one of the greatest gifts we've been given. People can imagine that, take the power of like just taking off this suit of clothes, this suit of negativity, and throwing it away. It can almost be an imaginative act, coupled with, the 4 A's that you gave us for, the framework for creating a ripple effect. I mean, that's how you can then apply the 4 A's to yourself when you don't have this suit of clothes, this negativity that you're taking on from the world, from the news, from social media. There's so many ways that you can practice yourself into getting into the ripple effect. It has to be a habit, right? Like you've described. This would have to be a habit, but it's easily accomplished, I think, if you have this habit in your daily routine.
Yes, and it has to be true. So many of these things, and there are so many, I don't know, there are so many processes and so many things like this that come out and people try them. It needs to be true from a gut level that what you're saying to someone, you mean it. And you can look at someone and go, that person's got a long ways to go before they're going to be happy because they exude negativity most of the time. Well, somewhere in there, they're doing something that's positive. They're doing something that you can congratulate them on, and they'll know that it's true. So truth is a big part of this, and you need to let it sink into yourself that if you're going to go through these processes of becoming more positive, it has to feel true to you. On the other side is the people who say, well, you fake it till you make it.
Yeah. It kind of works, doesn't it? Doesn't that kind of work? Right? That's like a habit. That's just get this habit going in your life.
Yeah. So I can't really say that one thing doesn't work over the other thing, but without question, focusing on the positive things and then expressing them. Don't just keep it to yourself, express it to them. And it probably, I would say the ripple effect is very powerful with adults, and if possible, even more powerful with children. But adults don't get the positives from other adults as often.
Oh, Mike, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have a great story I'm thinking about, a random act of kindness that I experienced a couple months ago. So I do one-on-one coaching through the Now-ist teaching. I take on one-on-one clients and help them go through this process. And one of my clients was just inconsolable. She had just 3 things happen to her all at the same time. She lost her job, she lost her apartment, and her boyfriend broke up with her. And she was just in a hovel crying. And so instead of doing the Zoom conversation or the phone call, I met her. And it came to me how when you can take, even in traumatic situation, when you can take the attention off yourself and pay it forward to somebody else, it changes your energy like a random act of kindness. She said, I can't do it. I'm just too overwhelmed. So I said, okay, I don't know if this is going to land with you, but I want you to try. In the next day or two, just be open to an opportunity to serve somebody that can't thank you or repay you. And the point is just to take the tension off yourself, put it on somebody else and see how it affects your life. So she was at Trader Joe's a couple of days later, and she calls me up that day and tells me the story a couple of days after we had this meeting. And she was in Trader Joe's, and a couple checkout aisles away was this mother and this 8-year-old boy. And she had a huge, basket full of groceries, and her credit card wasn't working. She had no cash, she had no check. And she noticed that, and she was in her sunglasses because she was been crying. But she noticed that and she thought, she goes over there with her credit card, puts it in the machine, and just says, "Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm just, let me do this for you." And then she walks away. And the lady is crying and she says, "Oh, no, no." Yeah. And the boy sees this act of kindness. Speaking of children being the recipients of the act of kindness, kindness by osmosis, just by being in the space. And so she got the gift of watching the Trader Joe's, team help this lady who's bawling, and her son seeing this random stranger take her groceries out and help her in the car, because everybody was affected. The clerk, the checkout, the bagger, people watching. I'm getting chills recounting the story. But then she calls me that day, and her life has changed dramatically ever since that experience, because that ripple effect, if you will, that random act of kindness spread out. Now she has this story. I'm telling it to you and everybody listening and watching. And she, I'm sure, will tell that story. Her life's in such a better place now. But I believe it all started with that random act of kindness and the ripple effect that it caused that came back to her in her life.
Yeah, that's a great story, Billy. That's and you asked earlier, how are we going to get the concept of the positive ripple effect to be more prevalent? How do we get people to talk about it all the time? Because they need to. We need to be talking about this. We need, as friends, we need to talk about it back and forth and then put it into play. I certainly think that teachers, it should be part of school curriculum. They should be talking about this in a very serious way. They have a tendency to make it into a nursery rhyme or something. This needs to be taken as seriously as math, as reading, and all the rest of this stuff, because it's essential, I think, to us moving forward without blowing ourselves up uh, with nuclear weapons or something like that. But
There's
I
been
think
many
that,
great spiritual teachers that have said that if you could make, that's called the quantum shift, right? Or the phase transition, the 100th monkey effect. If you can create that a ripple effect and that effect on a global level, you can affect so many people that the war, the hunger, the strife, the mental, the emotional, psychological overwhelm on the planet would be lessened to such a degree that we would start to shift our planet in a better way.
yeah, I totally agree. I also think that it can be done in schools. That can also be done in business. I wrote a book called The Visionary Leader, and it ended up on the bestseller list for business books for, I don't know, 6 months or something like that.
Wow.
People liked the concept, and it was about the whole idea. The whole motto was the the best leaders are those who serve those whom they lead. Um,
Mm.
and we were headed that direction in the 90s, late 90s, etc. But we've kind of gotten away from it back to a dictatorial, especially I think when the big tech took over, big tech kind of went backwards in terms of the way that it handles its leadership. Its leadership is very
Mm.
authoritarian from the top. Whereas the visionary leader and what we were talking about was, no, we share in the decision making because we're giving great respect to the people that we work with. And since you work most people work in a working environment, and probably will so again after COVID continues to die down. How you work with the people who are around you 8 hours a day becomes incredibly important. And so work structures need to be set up so that this positive ripple effect is the foundation, it's the walls. And we also found that businesses were more uh, ultimately more profitable if they did this. So it's not just a pie in the sky thing. Hey, let's be nice to each other and dance around the maypole. This has got real positive effects in every way that you can think of, from financial to psychological.
Mike, you've been such an amazing storyteller, and I've known you for quite a few years. And one of the favorite novels that I've ever read in my life is a book you wrote called Gods of Our Time. And talk about the ripple effect in that book. And if that book, I believe, is coming out again, right? A re-editional, a
Yeah, it's a
repurposing.
new edition.
New edition. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. But I love that story, and I love that story. That story has to be a movie. I know it was close to being optioned to be a movie, and I hope then and pray that when it comes out again, that maybe a movie company picks it up. But talk about that book, because there is a ripple effect in that story, and I love how you tell that story. I was just gripped. My daughter recently read it. My wife is currently reading it, and it's a story that is just heartfelt. It connects so many themes and people in the world and love stories in Paris. So tell us a little bit about that before we have to go, about how that ties into the ripple effect.
Oh, I appreciate that, Billy. And it is the second edition. It's been redone. It came out in February, as you know, 2020, right? When COVID came out. And I was scheduled to go across the country and talk about it, and all those things got were canceled. So we're coming out with and I rewrote it to some degree and added some parts to it. But it is set in 1925 in Paris, as you say, and it's two people who have life issues, and they meet in the most unlikely way and work together, help each other, help themselves. And I really didn't the applying the ripple effect to that is retroactive. I didn't realize that's what was going on until I start focusing on the ripple effect itself. And I go, that's exactly what happened in this book. And they both started out in very murky waters, so to speak, in their own lives. And yet each did small positive things for each other and for themselves. And then there's a cast of other characters too, including Ernest Hemingway, um, and other artists.
And Pablo Picasso, and right. So,
That's why it's called Gods of Our Time. Our main character is a journalist, and he's going to Paris in 1925 to interview these people he thinks are going to be gods of his time, Fitzgerald and Picasso and Gertrude Stein. Well, they don't turn out to be. They're not exactly people who create positive ripple effects, except through their literature. And I wanted to show that this happens sometimes. We can create ripple effects in some ways in our lives, and in some ways we don't. But it was really a fun book to write. It was optioned for a film, but again, COVID shut the film company down because they couldn't do anything. So we're redoing that, and hopefully it'll move forward and get some more interest. But yes, Gods of Our Time definitely has this ripple effect in it, as does No Ordinary Days. Both of them are on my website, as you know.
your website is 60degreespublishing.com. So I know I like to associate things to remember. Tell me why 60degreespublishing.com is named that.
Well, and 60 degrees is spelled out. So it's SIXTY. 60 degrees 60 degrees is the temperature it must be before butterflies can fly, because they're cold-blooded. So this is a symbolic of what we do for our writers and our readers. Publishers Weekly did a real nice page on me and said that. So yeah, 60 degrees publishing.com. These books will also be available on Amazon. They'll be up for pre-order here pretty soon. But again, if you get it through my website, I will sign it.
Oh my gosh.
They'll also be out at Barnes and Noble, etc., when it's publishing time. Billy's book, The Now-ist, is also on 60degreespublishing.com. Very proud to have that up there.
Thank you.
So yes, I just wish for the new year that everybody gives themselves and gives others the gift of the positive ripple effect.
Amen. What a beautiful way to tie up this podcast, this incredible interview with one of my dear friends, Michael Bowker. But more than that, he is just an incredible force in this world. He is a wordsmith. He's an incredible journalist, author. I call him an artist. I know he doesn't like that term, but I just think what he's created into this world, and it is creating a ripple effect. It has changed my life and so many people's lives because I'm so tied to his storytelling and his brilliant way he pens stories and brings them into this world, into making them feel like they're real. My imagination is like firing off when I'm reading Gods of Our Time. So I can't wait to read No Ordinary Days. So maybe you should bookmark, everyone, 60degreespublishing.com. Get on the pre-order mailing list. I know you can go there. You can find out updates when they're coming out. Mike, I'm sure will be doing autograph sessions, maybe doing some readings at local bookstores if you're in the Santa Barbara area. But I know you'll probably be touring a little bit and sharing this message and this wonderful ripple effect of this book with the world. Hopefully, you're lucky enough to meet this gentleman, shake his hand, get his autograph. And it's been an honor to be with you today, my brother. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. And I pray that this podcast be a ripple effect and that people will be inspired to go out and use those 4 A's that you've given. Let's recount the 4 A's real quick, because it's a simple framework for creating a ripple effect in your life and in others' lives.
It's acknowledge yourself and someone else, is to appreciate and show it or say it, to appreciate yourself for what you do, who you are, and those around you. Advise when you're asked, and to admire what you're doing, what others are doing, and to be able to express that. People take that to heart, and they'll remember a compliment, admiration for a long, long time, and it matters. It really, really matters.
If we start 2023 with that, how can we lose, everyone? So go out there, pay it forward, create a ripple effect in other people's lives, but start with your own, and we'll just see how this year turns out. Thank you so much, Mike Bowker. 60degreespublishing.com is his website. And this is Billy Mandarino, the Now-ist, wishing you all the blessed. Thank you, Mike.